Okay, I'll press OK.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ted, welcome to Beyond the Title. I normally start by asking about comedy heroes, but for many entertainers, you were theirs. So who were your heroes growing up, and did you meet any of them?
Oh boy, yeah. Well, my comedy heroes. I grew up in a show business family, really. My dad worked at Butlins in 19, well, frozen to death. And he was a redcoat at Pwllheli camp in North Wales, where he met my mum. And she was on holiday and they met. And my dad was in showbiz and he was an entertainer, stand-up comedian, cruise director. I think he worked as a trampoline artist's assistant once. He did everything you could think of, and we moved around a lot. But growing up, I mean, my heroes. I've been watching Tony Hancock lately. I never got to meet. I met his brother Roger, who's an agent, but I loved Hancock and can almost quote him verbatim. Marvelous. Everyone remembers in the Blood Donor that sketch. A pint. I don't mind giving a reasonable amount, but a pint that's nearly an armful. But my favourite line in that is when the doctor says, "It's just a smear, Mr. Hancock." He says, "It might be a smear to you, mate. It's life and death to some poor wretch." So I loved him. Never got to meet him. I was a great fan of the Goons, and I got to meet Spike Milligan a couple of times. And I also worked with Eric Sykes as his understudy, and he wrote the Goons a few times. He shared an office with Spike Milligan a long, long time ago. So Eric Sykes was a great comedy hero of mine. And one I knew best of all was Les Dawson, who I understudied and played alongside in summer seasons and pantomimes and everything. And Les was a great laugh, and I miss him to this day. I went to his wedding and when he married a second time, and yeah, he was one of my comedy kind of heroes, really. So it was great to work with him. And Ken Dodd, I knew quite well. By Jove, young man, he used to. I was there actually the day Ken Dodd was. Do you remember the problems he got over the income tax, Josh? And Ian, do you remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah, he said the trouble with my problem was, he said, in 1802 income tax was tuppence in the pound. My problem is, I thought it still was, but yeah, I met him a few times, and he was a great comic influence. I'm trying to think of other people that I knew and worked with. My dad knew lots of people in the business, both comics and non-comics. But yeah. So they were just a few of them, and I've been lucky enough to work, with contemporary artists like who's now a very dear friend of mine, Peter Kay. With Phoenix Nights and that Peter Kay thing, and I think Peter is a genius. I think it's a word that's used too often. I also worked and enjoyed the company and friendship of Victoria Wood, who again I think was a genius. And the word is often used, I think is overused sometimes, but these people have something just wonderful about them. And Victoria's mind was just so creative, and yet she was very shy. I described her once in a documentary about her as a very shy show off, which was, I think, kind of summed Victoria up. And other comics I've met, Bob Mortimer, Vic Reeves, or Jim Moyer, I've worked with. I've acted with Jim Moyer, or Vic, as he used to be known. What's on the stick, Vic, in those great days. And Yeah, it was great. You remember Vic and Bob's big night out, and the scientist, was it Les who came on? He hates the chives, but he liked the chives or hates the chives. But I've always liked surreal humor like that. I don't like cruel humor. Les Dawson always used to say, "Be kind." And I think if you look at the great comedians of today, the ones that are still highly popular have got a warmth behind them. People like them. People like John Bishop. People who you'd like to spend a bit of time with. And they have a kindness in them. I think I've never liked cruel humor, and yeah, there's just a few of the names for you. Yeah.
What was Roger Hancock like?
Roger was he looked a bit like I don't think he's still going, Roger. He I don't think anybody really knew Tony Hancock. I've read so much about him. I worked with June Whitfield, who was worked with so many people, and she played the nurse in the famous blood donor sketch, and people talked about him. And the one thing that people said, I remember this phrase, I don't know who actually said it, was that, he wanted so much, but that terrible phrase people use, they battle with their demons. And with Mr. Hancock, Tony Hancock's case, he 42, he just took his own life in Australia, only 42, and he had problems with alcohol, of course, but mentally, I think Eric Sykes said, he closed the door on it. First of all, his writers, Goldon and Simpson, who were brilliant and who knew and wrote specifically for him. And he wrote, then he closed the doors on all the actors who worked with him. Kenneth Williams, there's somebody else I worked with. I did a series with Kenneth Williams in 1985 for Granada TV. It was a bit of a disaster, the program, but it was worth it to meet Kenneth Williams. But him and then eventually, finally, Sid James, who was one of the Carry On, stalwarts, but also starred in Hancock's Half Hour, and he sort of closed the door on him and his writers. And somebody said, finally, he closed the door on himself, and it's very tragic, really, very, very sad, but a great comedian.
Goldon and Simpson were Josh's very first interview.
Really? Well, when they tried to revamp Hancock with one of his greatest fans, Paul Merton, who I know Paul fairly well, and they did about half a dozen sketches, and they rewrote them, including the bed sitting room. When it's just him in his bed sitting room, and Goldon and Simpson were marvelous. They were there, and I always used to love doing impressions of Hancock. How dare you, dear, oh dear, stone me, what a life, and all the sayings. And I got on very well with them, and I talked with them about him as well, and June Whitfield, who'd worked with him. So I was lucky enough to be old enough to meet the kind of tab end of these people who'd worked with these kind of legends of show business, So Goldon and Simpson were incredibly creative, and they wrote for him. They understood the man, and I don't know whether he ever did. And he did one great movie with them. The artist, was it called? Or but when he gives it all up and becomes an artist, he gives it the boring life, and decides to become an avant-garde artist, and he's making this great huge sculpture. And Mrs. Cravat, Irene Handel, comes in and goes, "Oh, look at that horrible thing. What is it?" He says, "It's a self-portrait. What do you think?" She said, "Who of?" He said, "Laurel and Hardy. Who do you think?" "Aphrodite at the waterhole." And he said, 13 half stones of sheer poetry. So I could quote whole chunks of that. And Goldon Simpson, I think, were kind of quite impressed. And I was dead chuffed that they were impressed, with my kind of knowledge and memories of their greatest creation. But then he did that film, The Rebel, it was called, wasn't it? Yeah. And he decided he wanted international stardom, and he decided to do away with Goldon Simpson, and he brought out a film called The Punch and Judy Man, which was a flop. It didn't work because Galton and Simpson were Hancock, really. They understood the bones of the man.
Everyone who grew up in and around Liverpool in the 50s and 60s has got a story about the Beatles. For someone with obvious connections with Paul McCartney, what's yours?
Some of what my reactions about Paul McCartney.
What are your stories about?
Well, my mum and Paul, as I've mentioned a few thousand times, were first cousins. My mum was called Betty, and she had lots of uncles and aunties, and one of them was Uncle Jim McCartney, who had two sons. One was called Mike McCartney, and he had fame with Lily the Pink and Thank You Very Much in the 60s. And the other one was some guy called Paul, who my mum helped bring up when Mike and Paul's mother, Mary, died in 56. My mum, who's quite a bit older than Paul, but first cousins, and my Auntie Gin and my Auntie Mill, and all these family members of this working class Liverpool family helped bring them up. And Paul got on great with my dad because he and John Lennon had never had real experience of working with pros, and they actually came down and stayed with us when my dad ran a pub for a while in Reading and Cavendish. I've told this story before, but he put they're only about 17, I'd say, and I'd be 4 or 5, I think. I just remember it happening. And my dad was in a singing group called the Four Jones Boys, and they actually had cut a platter. They'd recorded some songs for Parlophone, and Paul used to ask my dad, what was it like when you're on stage, and how did you do this, and what was it like? And my dad came to see. I've got a picture here. Do you want me to show you? I'll just show you something. Yeah, I've done this before, but I don't want to go on and on about it. Hang on, be right with you. This photograph was taken by Mike McCartney in 90. Oh God, I'd be about 4 then, so it'd be late 50s. Can you see that?
Yeah.
That's my mum, and there's me eating an ice cream, and there's Paul on the guitar, and sitting on my pram, and he's strumming away. And my mum used to play the banjolele, so Paul would be about 15 there, and Mike, his brother, took the photograph. And I often think about the couple in the background there walking past. I wonder if they had any idea, of who this lad sitting in a baby's pram with a funny haircut playing the guitar was, and what would become of him. But there we are, and that's my mother Betty, who's a great beauty and a beautiful woman as well. And Paul loved her very much, as did all the family, So that was quite something growing up, having all the Beatles in the background, and my sister Kate and I, you know Kate Robbins, the impressionist singer, Josh, yeah. Um, she's 3 years younger than me. When we're 69, we went to London with my dad, who was the manager of a big nightclub called the Talk of the Town. And we went down, Kate, me, and my dad, and we stayed at Paul's house in Cavendish Avenue, in St. John's Wood, where we still got a house there. Got houses everywhere. And we went along, we went to Savile Row where the Apple studios were, and the offices, and then we went to Abbey Road, and we sat in the famous Abbey Road #2 studio and listened to the Beatles, recording, and it was incredible. And I was 14, 15, I think, and it's just an amazing thing to grow up with, and I do get asked about it quite a lot, and I sometimes I think other comics go, here we go, Ted Robbins talking about being related to Paul McCartney, but I'm related to John McCartney as well, and I was related to Jim McCartney and Uncle Joe McCartney, and they were a big clan, the McCartneys. And my grandmother, who I never knew, she died before I was born, but my mum's mum was called Annie McCartney. So yeah, that was quite something, really, And you go back to school the next weekend or after the weekend, and people say, well, what, this is 1969, remember, when just as the Beatles were about to fold and everything, and Paul and John had differences. And we met Yoko Ono once in Paul's house, and she was eating coffee beans, and she offered Kate and me some coffee beans, and we thought, well, she saw that, and I thought, God, how could you eat these, But it's just one of those things. That's all she offered us. That's all she offered.
I was about to ask, is she a bit crazy? But you've just answered my question for me, I think, by eating coffee beans.
Well, I mean, everybody, time marches on, and Paul was married to Linda for 29 years, and he loved her very, very much. It was a great love affair, and Linda was a lovely woman, who knew her own mind, but strong-minded. But before that, Paul had gone out with Jane Asher, again, who I knew and I'd seen at family parties. And when I was 11, I was very ill with rheumatic fever, and I was in hospital for a long time. And Paul and Jane had come and see me, and Uncle Jim and Mike, and loads of other relatives as well. And all Beatle fans, because Jane was charming lady, great actress, was considered beautiful. Do you know what I mean? And then Linda came along, who just wasn't impressed by all this kind of worship. Just wanted to live a life with Paul, and she got a very bad press to start with. But then it changed, and then when Linda died, everyone was so sorry for Paul, and I think it's a bit the same with Yoko, that she was everyone. I know Cynthia Lennon, John's first wife, and I've met her, interviewed her for Granada TV programs years ago, and Yoko got a terrible press, and I think a lot of it was judgmental on her appearance, how she looked. She was Japanese avant-garde artist, but John loved her very much, and she's often blamed for, breaking up the Beatles and John and Paul, but it was much more complicated than that. I wasn't part of that, but she was always nice. Well, she was nice to me in our case anyway, and she does and did love John very much. So, there you go.
One of the striking things about your early career is that, like many of the greats of showbiz, from Tarbuck to Ritchie, you were a redcoat at Butlins. In your opinion, how significant is holiday camp entertainment to the story of British pop culture?
Well, thank you for saying comedy greats. I really do blush at that, but very nice you say it. I used to say to younger people, say, "Oh, I want to get into showbiz. I want to," and I'd say, "Go and do a summer season somewhere, like Butlins, Ponty's, used Warner's with the other holiday camps. They were green coats, you know. But it's very funny of the people I know, that the contemporaries I know are Bradley Walsh, again, who's a mate. He was a blue coat. Um, who hosts the 1% show? You know,
Lee Mack.
who? Sorry,
Lee Mack.
yeah, Lee Mack. Lee Mack. He was a blue coat. Very funny. Other comics I remember. I mean, you know, like people like Tarby was a red coat, and it was a great play thing. And the ones who do very well now have got something about them. They have a communication with I know it sounds awful, but real people. You know, they're very different from maybe, you know, this isn't an old man going on about modern comedians are all, alternative comedy and it's all rubbish and university comedy. It's not. As Ken Dodd used to say, you know, there was rubbish years ago, and by Jove, and there's rubbish now, but we remember the good stuff. You know what I mean? But the one thing that all the comics I've met who really have done very well have got a warmth and a kind of generosity of spirit, which I think comes from ad-libbing, working all day with the public, you know, and then doing the red coat show or the blue coat show. And I think it was a great starting point for learning your craft, if you like. And I did, you know, I the difference was I left. Our dad never had what they say a formal education. You know, he said he left school at 11 and went to Bob's Billiard Hall in Wrexham, North Wales, where he was brought up. And he didn't sort of get a formal education, and he really stressed on me and all my sisters, Kate, Jane, Emma, and Amy. You know, you must get some education. So I ended up taking a degree in Liverpool in literature and drama, and then promptly left with a BA, which I think Reece Shearsmith in the League of Gentlemen that I was fortunate enough to be in says it's like having a degree in washing up, you know, for all the good it does you. But I did have one, and I went straight from there to Butlins, and it's great. And if any young person wants to get into showbiz, that's one of the ways of doing it. Cruise ships do it a lot, but that's mostly for dancers and established acts. But if you want to, you know, learn how to, the old word was patter. You know, you learn a bit of patter, you learn to ad lib, you learn to just stand there if something went wrong, or if it's raining outside, you'd be told, right, in the ballroom, everyone in, we'll have a game of bingo and then we'll do something, you know. And you brought whatever skills you had, if you had any, and you just did them, you know, and you did it week in, week out. And it was hard work. But I thought, and it had a discipline to it as well. I was never in the armed forces or anything, but, you know, you had to be up early, you had to be smartly turned out in your white flannels and your white shoes and your red coat, in my case, or a blue coat if you were at Pontins, or a green coat if you were at Warner's, or a yellow coat if you were at Maplin's Heidi High, which is very accurate program. My dad, because it was so accurate, you know. So yeah, holiday camps, good places to go. Still a good place to go for a holiday, but become a red coat if you can, or a blue coat, or any coat.
You began your professional career in the mid-1970s on the Northern Working Men's Club circuit. Researching
Well,
researching
sorry,
this period, sorry.
no, go on, Josh, Ian.
Researching this period, I find it very interesting in the way it created its own unique style of entertainment. How do
Yeah.
you think your generation bridged the gap between mainstream variety and alternative comedy?
Well, I'm 69 in August, and I kind of just I don't know. Sometimes I used to think, oh, I've just missed the boat with the new wave of comedy, but there was an established kind of hierarchy of the Tarbys, the Bruceys, and and that's when Paul Jackson. At the same time, punk music was doing the same with music kicking down the doors of the establishment, as it were. And the Working Man's Club was is a real link with 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 people, and they used to put up on the notice board what acts were coming up and how much you were being paid. So if you're on, say, in the mid 70s, 30 quid or something, you'd have ex-miners or fellows who worked in steelworks and women who'd worked in the mills or whatever, and they'd come for the night out at the club. And Phoenix Nights, in many ways, captures that, and they'd come along and they'd look at how much money you were earning, and they'd say, comedian, well, we'll see if he's worth bloody 300 quid, 30 quid, 300. And it was very tough because you had to get a laugh straight away. There was no, it wasn't personality. There was no, I think the modern term is riffing with the audience. You didn't come out and go, how you doing, folks? And point to people in the front and to have a bit of banter with somebody there. And I remember some comic was on at somewhere up north. I won't say it's Batley Variety Club, but no, it wasn't as big a club as that. And he was doing newish stuff. And somebody shouted from the back, I think it was Phil Cool. Do you remember Phil Cool, the great comic? And it was very different, Phil. And he, impressionists and everything. And after he was, as the phrase goes, business, dying on his ass, a voice shouted out from the back, tell us one we know. Which is, yeah, you know what I mean? They kind of knew the gags, and there were loads of gags, like people say I put weight on. Well, I've had a lot on my plate, and you had to take the mickey out yourself. Doctor said you're obese, so they want a second opinion. He said you're ugly as well. And you had to go bang, bang, bang with gags. It's slightly coming back to that now, telling jokes. And I think Peter Kay again was instrumental in that because he loved the clubs and used to go with his mum, his dad, and his family to their local club in Bolton, which was very like the Phoenix Club, and there was a warmth there. But if you didn't hit your stride straight away, I'll tell you the best and worst heckle I ever got was at a working man's club, and I just started out. I think I'd left Butlins, and I had an act I thought that would last 20 minutes, half an hour. And I got introduced, and it's called the Willow Social Club in Salford, and it's still going. Very nice club and full Friday night, and I was first act up, I think, or something. And I'd been on for a couple of minutes, and I tried what I thought were my best gags, and I was dying like as the great Max Wall once said, slightly surreal thing. He said, "No, I died like a louse in a Russian's beard," and never knew what it meant, but I got it, And I was there, and the first thing that happens when you're nervous, when you're performing or stand, people know this when they do speeches and weddings and things. Your mouth dries up, you got no spit, you can hardly talk, and your timing goes, and so I thought I'd give this crowd who were getting restless. They hadn't actually started heckling me, but they were starting to talk to each other and ignoring me, which is even worse. And I thought, all right, I'll give him my best gag. I was going to save this to the end. But I'll quickly tell you the gag. You probably know it. Very old joke, but I thought it was my best one. And it involves, I said, my Auntie Maud went to a seance to see if she could contact her late husband, George. The medium went into trance and said, hello, love, it's me. She said, oh, it's George, that's him. I reckon. What's life like on the other side? He said, it's not too bad. He said, we have sex first thing in the morning, then we have salad for breakfast, then we have more sex, then we have some more salad, and then it's salad and sex all night long. She said, I never thought heaven would be like that. He said, heaven be buggered, I'm a rabbit on Hampstead Heath. Now, that was the joke. Yeah, which is, but I was dying to death. And so I managed to spit out the first line. Remember, I hadn't had a single laugh, and I'd been on for about, I don't know, maybe 4 minutes. It seemed like I'd been on for an hour and a half. And I said, anyway, my great uncle Arthur died. Excuse the language. I can't swear, can I? Yeah. Anyway, so I said, my great uncle Arthur died, and a voice clear as a bell from the back shouted, well, I bet it went through fucking laughing, son. And I left the stage to the sound of my own footsteps, as they say. But why does anyone do it? I don't know. It's a incredible thing to have the guts to do or want to do. And now, God, I don't know. I mean, it's easier when people know you a bit, and I've got Phoenix Nights especially to thank for that. And with younger kids, the Slammer, a kids program I did later, and I get 23-year-olds coming up to me now who were 11 when that went out, and it was about kids' prison. They know a prison for people who committed crimes against show business, and it would never be allowed today, But and then the audience would come in and they'd see all these old variety acts or new variety acts, often circus acts, things, and they'd vote on it, and it was a real dose of proper old variety, if you like. And amazingly, the kids loved it. And a guy called Steve Ride, who I think is one of the best producers in the country, produced it. And he's also just been producing the last series of Number 9, which I don't know if you're a fan of, but I'm a great fan of The League of Gentlemen, of course, who gave me a chance to be in that. I was in Creme Brulee, the group. I played Tony Cluedo, the lead singer who sings Voodoo Lady. And yeah, you remember that. So yeah, I'm great fans of all of them, of Jeremy Dyson, the writer, and Steve Pemberton, Reece Shearsmith, and Mark Gatiss, yeah, who have all gone on to great things, yeah, I was just very lucky to be involved with these things,
It was on Granada's Wood and Walters that you began your illustrious warm-up man. In your opinion, what makes a good warm-up artist?
Well, first of all, you don't ever set out to become a warm-up artist. It's seen as a way of starting and going through the business. I went the other way around, really. I had a career in the early 80s and mid-80s, and I had a series or two with my sister Kate on ITV, and I was becoming a bit of a name, and the series didn't work, really. And I did a series with Kenneth Williams and Lulu called Some You Win that went out on Saturday nights. It was only 6-7 episodes, and it was called Some You Win. Oh, we didn't win this one. It was just it was the wrong producer, the wrong format. I didn't know quite what I was doing, and I kind of my career, as Les Dawson used to say, I was on the crest of a slump, and I was looking for work, and I met Judy, my dear wife, Judy, who's a professional choreographer, dancer, and she was living abroad in Spain, where she had an act. She had a magic act. In fact, if you watch The League of Gentlemen, do you know the acts at the end where they go next, and all goes a one-legged Elvis to a blue shoe, and well, there's one act at the end, and it's the lady, very glamorous lady magician, and she's all dolled up, you know, with top hat and tails and fishnets and all that, and she produces doves and she does magic. And the song behind is every little thing she does is magic, the police song. And she throws a dove into the air and it flies up and hits the air conditioner and gets splattered and lands all over Brian Potter's head, over Peter Kay's head. And he goes, next. And that's Judy, my wife, who, you know, Peter's great friends of. And she wasn't, she always points out she wasn't the lady with the ping pong balls. There was a lady who did some tricks with ping pong balls, which I won't go into. He goes, oh, they're coming, Jenny, they're coming. Oh, I know. Oh, it's coming. Where are they coming from? Said, oh, that wasn't Judy. That wasn't Judy. That was some other lady. But no, she's great, and she understands the business, and great dancer. She still does movement classes for older people where we live in Lancashire. We live, me and Judy and her dear mum Dorothy, who's 91, who's the mayoress of Accrington. That's how we got to meet. Judy came over from Palma, Mallorca for the mayor making ceremony, and Dorothy and her, my late father-in-law Cliff were the mayor and mayoress of this part of Lancashire called Hyndburn, which is Accrington, Oswald Church, I think. Anyway, part of East Lancashire. She came over from Palma, Mallorca, where she lived, and we met, and it was love of her sight, and I asked her to marry me 3 days later, and she left Palma, Mallorca, and the beach and the sun and everything, and we moved into a grassy flat on the Oldham Road, was it? I can't. Oldham Old Road. Oh, and it was November and it's freezing, and I remember looking at me thinking, I suppose I must love you if I've come all this way for this, you know. But sorry, to get back to your original question. So I sort of couldn't get arrested for a couple of years, and I met Judy, and we fell in love, and we got married, and then our son, she was expecting our son Jack, and we had to get somewhere. We didn't have anywhere to live. We rented places, and then eventually we found a little place in Lancashire, and I said, you know, I need to work, and the working men's clubs weren't as prolific then, you know. At the end of the 80s, 90s, there was the odd gig, and I'd done a few warm-ups in studios before, and she said, well, you're good at those, aren't you? So I said, yes. So I rang around a couple of times, and I was perfect because I knew how studios worked. I knew the cast members, so I was never frightened or of not being over familiar, but laughing and talk with them. And things like Men Behaving Badly and Martin Clunes and Neil Morrissey, you know, I became great friends with, and I ended up doing all Cilla Black shows, Surprise, Surprise, Blind Date, every show, Catchphrase, Wheel of Fortune. I could have gone out every night, and the money was quite good in those days. I think it was about, you know, at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, it was like £250, £300 a night, where, you know, comics in what we call the alternative clubs were maybe going out for 30, 40 quid. So I started to earn money enough to get a little house and pay a mortgage, and we were doing okay. And things went on, and then Phoenix Nights came along, and suddenly I started getting noticed by casting directors again, because I've always been an actor as well, believe it or not. And I got a part in 2 Pints of Lager and a Packet of Crisps. You remember that series? And the producers said to me, will you have a word with our warm-up man. He's very good, and he's heard you're in the show tonight. I wasn't doing warm-up. This guy was, and they said, "Would you have a look at him? And he'd love to meet you and talk to you about the art of warm-up." So I watched him when I wasn't on scenes at the BBC, and I thought, God, he's good. This lad, he's really good. He's got warmth, he's got charisma, he's funny, he's likable, and he thinks on his feet. And I thought, wow, and he was perfect. He really was. Did a really good job. And afterwards, he came up in the green room afterwards. We were all having a drink, and he said, Ted, hi, I know you're the king of the warm-ups and all. I said, what did you think? I said, I thought you were fantastic. I said, but if you want my advice, he said, what? I said, don't do them anymore. He said, but I'm getting 200 quid a night for this. I'd have to work 3 or 4 clubs to get the same. I said, I know, but you're so good at it. If you don't watch it, in 20 years' time, you'll still be doing warm-ups. And that comedian, it's very corny, this was Jason Manford. And Jason, in later years, very kindly on a podcast, I heard him tell that story, and he said, Ted Robbins told me. I said, do what you're doing now, finish this series, and then go out on your own because you're good enough. And TV loves to stereotype people. If you're good at what you do, they keep you there. I got a reputation as being a very good warm-up artist, and I was very, I could be on for 4.5 hours sometimes in between breaks and everything, and I could just keep doing it, and nearly put me lights out, But yeah, so that was my story, Jason. And the next time I saw him was at some big do, and he was already becoming a big name, and he came up and hugged me, said, Ted, thank you so much for that advice. I took it. I said, I know you did. So I should have charged him. Professional advice, 500 guineas, Josh.
Felix Bonus, Barry
Oh,
Crouch,
yeah.
Stevenson are some of the doyens of TV warm-ups. Why do you think this brand of entertainment has created so many stars, and how instrumental is the TV warm-up man to the story of light entertainment?
Well, it's funny, actually. If you look at American sitcoms, like Friends and Cheers and all the big ones, Everybody Loves Raymond, they all have warm-up artists that they use. But the similar pattern is they stay there. Apart from a few who become like Felix. I used to know Felix, and he used to do a song of Sounds of the Sea. Just ended up and down like this. Sounds of the Sea, and everybody up and down, and he was a kind of he went on to Maplin's, in Heidi High as Fred Quilly the jockey.
Yeah.
So he was part of that, and again, it is a good learning curve. But the thing the producers don't want when they're so involved in making a show is the comic or whoever they've brought along to start saying to them, I'd like to be in the show. Could you look at this pilot episode I made called, Here's Eddie or something. I don't know, some daft thing. But I remember Carolina Hearn, God bless her, who again was a lovely friend, and I did all the Mrs. Merton shows with her, and she was very in some ways she was quite naive about the business. She came in, she was a secretary, and everyone could see how funny Caroline was, and she got offered a few warm-ups. She said, Ted, what do I do? What's I say? And I said, well, I can't start giving you a script because what might work for me wouldn't work for you. I said, just be yourself. And she was, and she did a few, and everyone could see what a great talent she was. And she went on from there, of course, and did, she worked the clubs as well as Mother Mary Immaculate. She was a nun, along with Steve Thompson and Steve Coogan and that Fast Show gang, and then she became this character, Mrs. Merton, and she was brilliant. And hugely missed, as like another genius, Victoria Wood, great women of comedy, you know.
Beyond the title, it prides itself on never touching on any personal or sensitive issues, but you're part of a very prominent and successful showbiz dynasty. So, in your opinion, why is British entertainment packed full with dynasties, and how has it affected your career?
Oh, well. There's a question. The dynasties. I'm trying to think which dynasties, showbiz family dynasties. Do you mean? I mean, I've talked about the McCartney one, obviously, and in a way, I think Paul's brother Mike not suffer from it, but Mike is a hugely talented man. Mike McCartney or Mike McGears, you know, and he's had hit records with Scaffold, and he's written books, and great photographer and very creative, and he's recorded albums. Um, the problem is you're always going to be compared to your brother. You know, if he'd not done that and become a dentist, perhaps he would. I don't know. You know, he always says his great fear in life is when he does pass away, maybe a long time in the future, I hope. But, you know, on his gravestone, he might read, "Here lies Paul McCartney's brother." But dynasties in showbiz, in this, there's Jimmy Tarbuck, Lisa Tarbuck's gone on to, I acted with her in a thing called Mount Pleasant. She's got her own very successful Radio 2 show now. So she obviously knows that, you know, that side of the business through her dad, who was in his day was an alternative comic. He was this breezy young man who blew in. They used to call him the fifth Beatle because he had the haircut. Oh, was that the one? You know, and that was a long time ago.
Yeah, Josh knows Jimmy very well.
Do you? Yeah. He's a very, very nice man, isn't he? And he's known everybody, you know. I know I've done a bit of research on you as well, Josh, and you know you've interviewed Barry Cryer, who was probably one of the last who knew so many. In fact, I'm probably I didn't know as many as Barry, or write for as many people as Barry Cryer, but he knew the lot. He knew everybody. He knew every gag. He knew Tarby, you know, and they were a dynasty amongst themselves, really. But family-wise, it's not like the Kardashians in this country, is it? I think it's for me, it wasn't a problem, the McCartney connection, because I'm not exactly known for my songwriting or singing, but Paul's always had a good sense of humour, as of all the Macs, as we call, you know, the McCartneys, great sense of humour, and that's rubbed off on all of us. And my sister Kate has had her own very successful career, is having, you know, she's recently been in Afterlife with Ricky Gervais. She was in the 80s. She was the voice of Spitting Image, many shows like that. And my youngest sister, Amy Robbins, was in a thing called The Royal, and she played a doctor. It was a bit like Heartbeat. Dr. Weatherall, she played for years and years, and then she's been in Coronation Street. She's just about to come back into Coronation Street. Another sister of mine, Emma, the middle one, she was married to Tinky Winky of the Teletubbies. A lovely man called Simon Shelton, who sadly passed away now, too early, very sad. But Simon was wonderful, a dancer, very tall. And he was, you know, he was Tinky Winky. And Emma was also, do you remember an advert called Sheila's Wheels? For ladies who enjoy their cars, Sheila's Wheels, and sort of Australian. Do you remember? I don't know if you remember that. There were two blonde girls and a dark girl, and the dark girl was my sister Emma, and she recorded backing vocals, Cliff Richard, and people like that. My sister Jane is a sculptress. who's sculpted many great things. She did a lovely bronze of Ken Dodd, which is in the Liverpool library. What's the library called? The big library in Liverpool. And it shows Ken in repose, just his head and shoulders.
Yes.
And it shows him the other side of Ken Dodd, the very intellectual, knowledgeable, widely read man that he was. And my mum, that's Jane. She's a sculptress, but funnily enough, Eurovision's just been on, and I don't know if you've noticed. Anyway, it's finished now. There's an eerie silence about it now, isn't there? All you could hear for about 2-3 weeks was, well, Eurovision, here we come, and this is.
Yeah.
But in 1980, my sister Jane and Kate, Jane was still at school, were part of a group called Prima Donna, and they had a song called Love Enough for Two, and they won Song for Europe with Terry Wogan when all the regions would vote, and that song was picked to represent the UK in The Hague, and in Holland, isn't it, The Hague? And they went, and it was the year the Irish singer Johnny Logan won with Watson of the Year, but Great Britain, Prima Donna, came third, and we were all, going to the but they came third. Whereas now we came third. So look them up, Prima Donna, Love Enough for Two, 1980. That's two of my sisters. The other girl, young lady, was called Sally Ann Triplett, who's made a big name for herself in the West End and in Broadway, I think, as a kind of all-rounder, triple threat, I think they call it, don't they? Singer, dancer, can do actress, But yeah. So whenever Eurovision comes around, I always find myself thinking, nobody mentions we came third in 1980. It's a bronze medal, Have a look at it when you can and listen to it, and it's a good enough song. Cheesy lyrics, but we were all very proud, and our family and friends and everything, So we're all involved in the business in one way or the other.
In 1987, you teamed up with your sister Kate for Kate and Ted ITV. What's the process of working alongside a family member, and how did you go about selecting the right material which would work for the both of you?
Well, that was the problem. Kate and Ted show, which I recently watched in retrospect, and at the time, it didn't do terribly well because they decided to put us together as a double act, and we weren't a double act. She was my sister, and I loved her, and she loves me, but we never worked together. And Kate had her own career as an impressionist and a singer, of which I was neither, but I was trying to be a comic, and I'd go into sketches, and some of these were written by very well-known writers, none of whose names I can remember. I wrote a few sketches. In fact, I did a spoof on the blood donor sketch with Tony Hancock and Kate as the nurse, June Whitfield. That was one of the best ones I did, and he said, "I've come to give a sample at the blood bank. We're not that type of bank." I said, "What type of bank are you?" "Well, you have to leave us a sample." "A sample of what?" And she leans forward. I said, "How dare you? How much do you want?" 10 cc's? Why, that's very nearly it. Yes, quite. Thank you, Mr. Hancock. But that was one of the highlights. I wrote that one, and I wrote a few songs, lyrics for numbers. But Kate came out as the obvious star of that show, and I suffered. I did suffer in the press, in that I was always compared to her. But in a way, I learned during that series to always listen to the little voice in your ear that says, "This isn't funny, this isn't you." But because I was suddenly given this network series big money for me then. My overdraft just gone platinum, and I didn't listen to the little not Jimmy Cricket. Come here, there's more. You don't. Jimmy, you do remember Jimmy Cricket, Josh? He's another old friend of mine. But what's Jimmy Cricket's gag? He does. He said, "I went to the station. Come closer to the radio." He said, "I went to the station. I said, I'd like a return ticket." He said, "Where to?" I said, "Back here." What am I talking about? So yeah, I did that series with Case, and somewhere looking back at it now, say, yeah, I thought it was quite good. But we kind of went our own ways after that. Kate did her own show, in which I did appear. And then the end of the 80s, as I said, I was scratching around a bit, thinking, well, have I blown my big chance? And I met Judy, and she got me, straightened me up, really, got me, focused and dressed smartly, and got me out to work. And I had two children, Jack and Molly. That picture behind me is a self-portrait of our daughter Molly, who's if you look up Molly Makes Cakes, Creative Cakes, there's a series on Netflix called Extreme Cake Makers, and she makes these incredibly realistic cakes, and she's known all over the world, actually, a big name. So that's sort of show business. And my son Jack, our son Jack, for 10 years has been a producer on Blue Peter. So he's involved in the business as well. And I've given him a bit of advice over the years, I think. Basically, just look people in the eye, give them a firm handshake, and be willing, when you start out in the career, to do anything. If you start out as a runner or a researcher or junior, or nothing, even it's the lowest of the low jobs, and it's just getting bottles of water for artists to start, it can become a bit tiresome, but always do it and always show willing. And there's always somebody in every business who notices the kid who's willing and has got something. And I just stress that to him: just show willing. If you're doing the gig, do the gig and concentrate on it. And someone somewhere will, please God, always see that you're good. And I think Jack's done that as well. So they are our kids are in showbiz as well. I don't know what our grandkids Lily and Oscar are going to do, but they're only 7 and 2.5. But they're pretty. Lily's quite a good actress, actually. But there we are. It's our grandkids.
You also worked with probably the greatest female entertainer in British showbiz history when you became script associate on Blind Date and Surprise Surprise.
Yeah.
In your opinion, how important was Cilla Black to the LWT network at that time?
Well, she was the queen of the London weekend television as it was then. She was very important to them, and again, her career was so successful because she'd started, at the Cavern, and the Beatles were there, and she was the happy girl, and then she'd started to sing. She got up and sang with various bands, including the Beatles, and then she started developing her own act, and she met her husband, Bobby Willis, who was a very, very good, tough, and I mean that in a pleasant way, but he was a man you wouldn't want to mess around with. And she got a big hit, and Paul wrote for her, I think, Anyone Who Had a Heart, and Step Inside Love, and she recorded Alfie, the great Burt Bacharach song. But she did this slowly. She worked her way up, and then when she got a hit, she went to London in the 60s, which for a young pretty girl in the age of miniskirts was it was a different kind of vibe there, man. And Bobby always looked after her, always did the deal, and he always got the best deal. And Cilla was learning all the time, very astute, very clever, and had that unique gift that I talked about earlier about being able to talk to people. And when she was on Blind Date, she could come up and put her arm around the contestant's shoulders, or if they were being a bit cheeky, she could, not put them down, but she did it in an inoffensive way. She knew how to handle people because she was confident in herself. And then she'd sing "Surprise, Surprise" at the end, and my sister Kate wrote that song, "Surprise, Surprise," which not many people know. Not a lot of people know that. So she was hugely instrumental, and I was script associate and warm-up man for it. She always asked for me to do the warm-ups because she saw me doing one up at Granada, and they celebrated, I think it was 40 years of Coronation Street. Shows how long ago it was. And she saw, and I was on for hours and hours. And she said to somebody, "Who's that? The fellow doing the warm-up?" They said, "Ted Robbins." She said, "Well, I want him for every show." She had a great guy called Bill Martin, sadly no longer with us, did it for years. But they asked me to become program associate, which actually meant script writer. But of course, the idea was always that it wasn't written, and all these contestants would, come up with it. If I was where would you take me? Or if I was a drink, what would I be? And of course, I'd sit in a room with these four lads, and then or four lasses, or there was three, wasn't it? And I'd say, "Right, what do you think you might ask?" Say, "Well, what would you do?" And they because they were so excited and over the top, they go. Some of the lads would go, "Well, like, I remember once fella said, I'd take you to the horse racing and I'd give you the best ride you've ever had." Went 7 o'clock on a Saturday. I think we'll have to have something a little more, perhaps. Oh, can I say there's nothing wrong in that, is there? Well, yes, there is, and you don't. And so I managed to persuade them, i.e., write them another answer, which wasn't. But I'd also, with the help of my wife Judith, she would help me write, because I was working so hard. We had to have descriptions from R. Graham of you're going on a date to, you're going to sunny Spain where the sangria will flow and sunshine, and you'll be on the sand and all on blind dates, and you have to find 26 different ways of saying that every week for different parts of the country, So it was quite a hard task. And when I couldn't do it, I'd ring up Judy, and she's very talented, and I suppose I shouldn't admit this, but she wrote a few of them, but she didn't get a credit, but I did. Program associate. So in other words, that meant writer, And I did the same for Surprise, Surprise, and I did a few bits on camera on Surprise, Surprise as well. I went out and did some bits of filming for them as well. So Cilla was enormously part of it, and when her husband Bobby died, we all went to the funeral, and I found myself sat between two director generals of the BBC. One was John Burt, and the other was the football guy, the guy who the Cockney. Who am I thinking of?
Greg Dyke.
Greg Dyke, yeah, Greg Dyke one side, and I think he'd just taken over from the other man, and they obviously didn't want to meet, so they looked for someone to sit, and they sat and chose me in the middle. So I'm thinking, I'm sat with the two directors of the BBC, the director generals, the bosses, the biggest guys, and they were very polite and talked to me all the way out of the church. And then as soon as I got out of the church, boom, I was gone. I was like the human shield, But we went back to Cilla's house, and she was devastated because Bobby was alive, and but she carried on, and then Cilla sadly passed away too early. But she was in the sunshine and living in Spain, I think, at the time. And we went to her funeral as well, and everyone was there, the great and the good, and Tom Jones was just ahead of us, and Lloyd Webber, and people name dropping, and you know, I shouldn't be name dropping. As I said to Elton John in the bath this morning, no more name dropping, Elton. Sorry, very old joke.
Josh knows the writer that took over from you on Blind. Oh,
yeah. Yes, was it?
Oh, no, you took over from on Blind Date. Josh knows the writer.
What was his name, Josh? Can you remember it?
Colin Edmonds.
Yo, Colin Edmonds. Gosh. Well, Colin Edmonds didn't just write for Cilla. Colin was actually probably best known for another name that I haven't dropped in yet, who was, I think, was he a red coat as well? It was Bob Monkhouse. And Colin is the font of all comedy and knowledge, you know. And Bob Monkhouse had these famous books of jokes, which he also illustrated, because he was a great cartoonist and artist, Bob Monkhouse. And Colin inherited those books. There was a story that they got stolen years ago. I don't even remember that. They disappeared, and a lot of very unkind people said, well, at least the jokes have gone back to their original owners. Which wasn't true. But Bob was a hugely intelligent man, and Colin equally so. And he's still going strong, Colin, and occasionally I catch up with him. And you know, he went back to, you know, Arthur Askey, and you know, he knew so much about comedy, like Barry Cryer. You know, he'd be one if you had a university challenge team about comic historians of this country. You know, you'd certainly want him there, and Barry, God rest him. I don't know if I'd make it maybe as a reserve. But, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just to give a bit of background, Josh and Colin are actually quite good friends.
Oh, you would. Oh,
yeah.
great! Give him my very best, will you?
And
Josh.
I was just saying as well, don't give Colin too much credit because his head's already big enough.
I know. A modest man with much to be modest about. No, it's not true.
Indeed.
But if you wanted a gag or you wanted something writing, Colin was, you know, always there. And do you know what? I'm going to tell him as well. I think I've got his number still. So wish him all the best. I know he was devastated when Bob died, but he great man, great. You know, we won't see their likes again. I remember years ago, I was doing Pebble Mill, the lunchtime show in Birmingham. Do you remember it? I don't know what I was doing on the show, but it was lunchtime, we were going out live, and I was in the green room, and Ken Dodd was on doing his bit live, and we had TV monitors in the green room, and some of the researchers and younger producers were talking amongst themselves, you know. And I said, excuse me, and I think I came across as a bit of a pain in the bum here, but I said, you know, you really should be listening to this. And one of them said, why? I said, because you're looking and listening to a link with the past that goes back to Grimaldi, it goes back to musical, back to variety. We won't see the likes of him again, of Ken Dodd, you know. And they went, well, really? It was like, well, it's just another stand-up. And he said, no, he's not. He's a link with the past, and the past carries on, and the past carries on and becomes the present, and it becomes the future. Lecture over.
In 1995, you took the hot seat for ITV's Chain Letters.
Oh yeah, gosh.
Would you
Chain,
consider-
chain, chain, chain letters. Yeah, that was. Do you know, I got that from doing a warm-up as well. I was doing Michael Ball's show in the 90s, and the head of Dynasties television was there. I'm embarrassed to say, I can't remember his name. Anyway, I had a particularly good night because there was lots went wrong. So I'd end up doing a 20-minute spot, then I'd do half an hour, and I kind of held the whole thing together. And Michael's a great bloke, you know, and huge talents and everything. But I'd fill in, and whoever was the head of Tyne Tees Television, because it was all regionals then. It was before it all became just ITV. He said we should find something for you, and next thing I knew, I was the host of Chain Letters 9:25 ITV Monday to Fridays, and it was a simple enough game. It's a bit. There's a game that Adil Ray presents now called Wordle. No, not Wordle. What's it called? Lingo.
Yeah.
And you got 4 letters, and you had to change a letter to make another word. And most of the time it was okay, but it's a bit like it happens on Countdown. You could see things coming up when you go, oh, and thank heavens it was recorded, because you'd have say the word lick would come up, and then they'd say change the I to a U, becomes luck, and then you've got LUCK, and they're going changed, and you go, whoa, hang on, you're not changing the L. Some of them would, you know. I've seen it happen. It happened on Countdown once. I think they got. I think the first letters out were CLIT. Do you remember that? They
Yeah.
actually broadcast it because, you know, what can
I was about to say that. Yeah, we are just saying, and the other C word came out in Countdown as well, didn't it? C.
Oh, it did. It did. Yes, yes. See you next day. That. Well, you know, it's in the dictionary. It's in there, isn't it? You know.
Exactly. Yeah.
You can imagine that. But they pre-record those shows, you know.
Yeah.
In case there's something, you know, you just can't at 5 o'clock. Mummy, what does? Let's see what's on CBBC. Shall we? Children's book.
Anyway, moving on. Without making a sweeping generalization, the dream of almost every northern entertainer is a role in Coronation Street. Was this on your bucket list?
Oh no, it wasn't, but it was a wonderful thing. It coincided with I had a spectacular in 2015. I was on stage with Peter Kay, and it's well recorded in the press. This, and I had a cardiac arrest, and a medic in the audience called Gary Loker, and a doctor. 30,000 people. He saw that I wasn't part of this. It was the opening night, you know, and I just dropped like a stone. I was due to have heart surgery, but I put it off so I could do this show and beg the surgeon, blah, blah, blah. And it was in all the papers. This was 2015. So I recovered from that. It took a year to get myself, because he did a thorough job. He broke all my ribs and kept me alive, saved my life. And that was in all the papers, all the press, the news, not because of me, of my fame, but because it was, you know, Peter Kay's big Phoenix Night show. And I recovered from that. And then I had my original operation, my open heart surgery, and they put a new valve in at Wythenshawe Hospital, which is a marvellous cardiac place. And then a years later, anyway. But I don't know whether this was because I was so well known at the time because of this coverage. But my agent rang up and said there's a part coming up from there's a part coming up from oh, what's it called? What was the show I was talking about there? Sorry. You have to edit this bit out. Oh yeah. Coronation Street. So the next thing was I became sorry, I've just moved the picture there. Just gonna ask my wife to Judith. Sorry. I've just lost me. The thing's just collapsed. There we are. Right, carry on. So my agent rang and said there's a part coming up Coronation Street. Would you be interested? And it was to be a love rat who went into Patty Clare's life, who plays Mary. They always called her Scary Mary, didn't they? Who's still a very popular character, very funny character, and I can't, Brendan, I think my name was, and I was a salesman of a magazine called The Unexplained or something, and I came to the corner shop and it was great, and I did about 4 months on it, and it was just fantastic, to work with all these people, and Bill Roach, and I remember a friend of mine coming along once, and I said just one thing. I said, everybody when they meet William Roach, Ken Barlow, often people go, "Oh, Ken, great to meet you." So sorry, he says, "It's William." He's always very gentlemanly about it, doesn't mind. So my mate was saying like a mantra, saying, "Don't call him Ken, don't call him Ken, don't call him Ken." And he did meet him. And I said, "Ken, this is my friend of mine, Phil," and he said, "Very nice to meet you, Mr. Barlow." But it was a great experience, and you suddenly realise how famous you become. For me, for a short period of time, I was still fairly well known, but people go, "Oh, what are you doing to our Mary? Some people take it quite literally. They think you've been a love rat to this very lovely lady, and we made quite a good comic pair. Yeah, and I enjoyed it. I'd love to go back sometime. You never know. Although I think I got killed off.
So
Yeah.
famously, you played Den Perry in the award-winning Phoenix Nights. What were your first impressions of the role?
My first thoughts were Peter said he was inspired, funnily enough, by Bernard Manning and the Embassy Club. Now I know Bernard Manning's become synonymous with the devil. You don't say his words, but he ran a very popular club and he was very successful. And despite a lot of his material being completely unacceptable then and now, he was also technically a very good comedian. I'll give you an example of one joke of Manning's that always made me laugh. He said, "I came out of the studio, there's all these fellas running down the road. I said, 'What's happened?' They said, 'There's a lion escaped from the zoo.' I said, 'Which way is it headed?' He said, 'You don't think we've been chasing it, do you?'" It wasn't all kind of like that. But so Peter did a lot of research going to see people like him and talk about northern working men's clubs, and he got a lot of inspiration from that. So when the part of Den Perry came up, he kind of, there was talk of him actually asking Bernard Manning to do it, but I don't know whether the powers that be or whatever happened, it didn't happen, or he didn't want to do it or whatever. But Peter rang me and said, "Listen, there's this part come up," because I'd been in that Peter Kay thing. He said, "Do you fancy being playing this Den Perry character, rival club owner?" I said, wow, yeah, of course I do. He said, only thing is, would you mind doing it as Den Perry? Like, oh God, my mind's going mad now. He said, would you mind doing it like Bernard Manning? And I said, what you mean this way? He said, well, similar sort of, Northern Working Man's Club. So yeah, I did, and it was a great success. And we did. There was only 2 series of it,
Yeah.
12 episodes, same as Fawlty Towers. And it's still today. I get people saying, "Oh God, you were in that way. How how did you? How come we never see it again?" And people find it on Instagram or they find it on YouTube or somewhere. Or getting hold of a copy of it, of the old cassettes, not cassettes, the CDs of it. There were box sets of them, but they're rare as hen's teeth. It's because it's never been repeated on stations like Dave and Gold and all those. So you can see a lot of Fools and Horses and all the great sitcoms of the time. But there you go.
In what ways do you think Phoenix Nights helped with the rediscovery of the phenomenon of working men's clubs, which had been responsible for creating so many comedy stars like yourself?
I think it was very instrumental. I think there was a kind of is the word glasnost or something. Whereas, I mentioned earlier, Paul Jackson and the young ones and Ben Elton, everybody kind of swept aside the old school. And then there was a kind of retraction as people realized that a lot of the old school were very good and very funny. And Peter was one of those people. He had Jim Bowen on the show, who was hilarious because he kept looking down the camera and going, anyway, not too, oh no, he's not bored, is he? But Peter, he had many different comics. He had stand-up comics, traditional entertainers, people you don't hear much of these days, but he certainly made it, gave it a kind of renaissance. And I think people love to go to a club now and see different kinds of acts. The comedy stores and the improv stores will always be there. And I think there's room for variety still. Hopefully, where people could go out, maybe have something to eat and watch a show. But, money and time and Netflix and everything, times change. So I don't know, but it certainly in people's minds, it brought back memories that, everything wasn't all corny, cheesy, and, men in Pringle t-shirts, V-neck sweaters and talking about golf. The wear good. Not that there's anything wrong with golf, but there were great comedians. Bob Monkhouse was a great comedian. Les Dawson was a great comedian. Many of the comedians, the Johnny Hamp show in the 70s, Mike Reed, Turn It In, who went on to act in EastEnders, was a very good comic. And these they could play places and fill them out, the big places. But there were still other acts, the Grumbleweeds. I don't even remember them. And there's a great comic called Johnny Casson, who has been working years and years, and he's known in the business as like the comics comic. He's so funny, and there's many of them, and they still work in Clubland, and long may Clubland continue to exist, and also the ale's cheaper in there as well.
Your career in showbiz has spanned over half a century. What are the significant changes that you've observed during this period?
People learning or forgetting how to be an audience, and that's in the cinema or in the theatre or at a function. And you do have, I think, you used to have a kind of moral duty to behave like an audience and give somebody a chance. I'm not saying, you know, you have to say everything they do is wonderful, but at least pay them the respect of watching. Whereas nowadays, you know, mobile phones are going off during performances. People are getting up and walking out, and you know, at different times, and or talking amongst themselves. And yeah, learning. That's one thing I've noticed. I've noticed a resurgence lately in people liking gags and jokes. You know, Peter Kay started it, I think, with his, you know, life in Blackpool Tower. He runs out with all that energy. All those. Do you remember the first one he did? Live at the Blackpool Tower Circus Arena, and he runs out. He goes, "All right, how are we doing? Right, let's get on. Let's get on with it. How does Bob Marley like his donuts? We're jamming. We're jamming. Come on, we're going places." And he told a joke. Then he ran and told another great, you know, gag, a bit cheesy, but joke. And I think people are beginning to like jokes. And, you know, you used to have to tell them as part of a story. I think comedy-wise, that's happened. I'm not really in a position to talk about other musical forms, but I think that there's still a great longing for variety, you know, like the X Factor and Britain's Got Talent and these shows, still very, very popular. And really, they're just what we were doing in the holiday camps 40 odd years ago. You know, the talent competition, you know, the punters talent competition, where you'd have holiday makers come up and sing their song, do their karaoke, or tell a few jokes, or do their party piece. And they were always greatly successful. So there's nothing new under the sun. It just keeps coming round. It just keeps coming round. You know, and I think there'll always be a place for talent, for comedy, and above all for warmth. I think that my dad, God rest him, always used to say, "Sell warmth." And he worked with Des O'Connor, my dad. Des was a young redcoat when my dad was an entertainment manager. And in later years, I worked on the Des O'Connor show, many big stars. And Des quoted my dad, and other people said, if they like you, the audience like you more than your material, then you're well on your way, you know. So let them, give them a chance to know you. Introduce yourself, say who you are, and if you're going to tell a joke, tell it against yourself first. Knock yourself, and don't go on the attack too quick. You know what I mean? So there are.
So, looking back at your career, what's your proudest achievement?
Oh, meeting Judy, because she sat over there. Our two children. I think I think being Den Perry in Phoenix Nights was something, because we'd go on holiday to Spain, you know, and all the bars would have Fools and Horses and shows like that on, repeated. But they'd started to do Phoenix Nights, and to go somewhere popular like in the Spanish Resort, and all the Brits go, Den Perry. I went to a football rugby match. I'm a big rugby fan, Sale Sharks, but I also support Wrexham, who are doing very well at the moment, because my dad was born and raised in Wrexham. And you know, Ryan Reynolds, the film star, has bought the club. It's on Netflix, The Story of Wrexham. And you know, they were a tiny little club in North Wales, and my dad supported them for over 70 years. And we went there, and a load of the crowd was shouting, Den Perry. Oh no, and it was at the wrestling as well. Our Jack, when he was about 11 or 12, he loved WWE wrestling. So I got some tickets for the arena in Manchester years and years ago, and a big crowd. It was when Phoenix Nights was at its peak. They all started chanting Den Perry, and I stood up and did the big break. So that was a huge ego, you know. But yeah, there's so many different moments, but that was one I thought, wow, that's great. My son was dead chuffed, you know.
So finally, what's next for Ted Robbins?
Well, at the moment, I'm opening next week. I'm opening the new cardiac wing at Blackburn Hospital, where they treated me in the past, and they've opened a new cardiac surgery wing. So if anything happens, I'll be in the right place. They've asked me to go and do that, and I have actually the last 12 months. I have had some medical issues I've had to deal with my old ticker, but I've had a great job done, and I'm looking towards just doing some gigs, and you know, I always used to do a pantomime. I don't know if I'm up for that yet, but I am available for bookings, as they say. No sole agent. And yeah, I'm looking to start to do a few little, maybe some clubs, or you know, sports clubs, and or an evening with, or an afternoon with Ted. And I have got a show I've done before with lots of photos of people I've worked with, and I talk about my career. And I'm also trying, in the middle of writing a sort of semi-autobiography of how I came to be saved that night all those years ago by a medic, a paramedic, and telling his story in the military and my story as an entertainer who wasn't well, who was building up for a big show, and we meet. So I've tried it that way. And the thing is, I'm terrible with technology, so I write it in my dreadful scrawl, and then trying to get it typed up and in my head. You know, it's. I think Peter Cook, the great comedian, met somebody once and said, you know, Peter Cook and Dudley Moore. You know, and Peter Cook met somebody in Soho in London and said, what are you doing these days? And this chap said, "Oh, I'm writing a novel." And Peter Cook said, "Yes, I'm not either," which was quite witty, I thought, because we always say we're going to do things and never do them. So I've got to do them. Got to do them.
When do you think it will be out and ready?
Oh well, when I get me, there's talk about. I've got relatives in the business, and one of my nieces works for a very big agency, who are publishers and agents, and he said they'd seen some podcasts and things I've done, and they said, you know, we should see if we can get you a book deal. So I don't know. As soon as I get my backside into gear and stop talking about it and do it. I am sort of doing it, but bit by bit, you know.
Yeah, when it does go out, you'll have to come back on here and talk to us about it.
I certainly will. You'll be first on my list, Josh. You will. Thank you so much. And I admire what you do tremendously, mate. And Ian, good to talk to you. But Josh, keep up the great work. And you obviously, you know your onions, pal. Yeah. As well as every other vegetable going like I don't know. I'm just talking rubbish now, which I've been paid to do for quite a long time. But well played, mate.
Yeah. Yeah, Josh will let you know when this episode will be going out, okay? So thanks for your time.
Oh, thank you, Josh. Thank you very much, mate. I mean, much respect and love to you, and keep going, pal. That's all we can do, all of us, isn't it?
Yeah, you keep going too.
I will do. Josh, it's a pleasure. Maybe I'll meet you face to face sometime soon. I hope so. And I'm going to tell everyone about this. And you're a great man. Thanks a lot.
You never know. We might do a live show together.
That'll be good. Juggling.
Thanks very much, Ted. Take care. All the best.
Juggling. No. You know what? Show together. I would love to do a show with you. I really would. I mean that. I'd be honoured. Thank you.
Yeah, Josh has already done 2 live shows with other stars, so
Yeah. Who did you do them with?
yeah, Arthur Smith was the first one, and then you did one with Steve Hewlett.
With who? Arthur Smith
Hewlett.
and
Steve Hewlett, the
oh
ventriloquist.
yes, yeah. And I know Arthur better, but he's the voice of everything these days, isn't he, Arthur Smith?
Yeah.
I really would